All right, and we are back. So today we are going to bake this leaf cluster onto a plane so we can use the cluster to populate our tree. So first steps first, we need a plane. So we're going to add this plane on here and get it so it's where we want it. Apply a rotation and scale. Now we're going to go into edit mode. Let's make sure we're straight on. And we are going to size this plane so it goes all the way around our cluster and it's all the way in front. And you might want to bake a couple different ones so you have some variation. We're just going to do it with one just because I'm showing you the concept, and that's what we'll go from there. So we're going to apply our rotation and scale from that. Now we are going to make a new image. So we're going to call this cluster albedo. An albedo is basically a color map. You know what, let's call it diffuse instead because it's not really an albedo. An albedo is just color. It contains no lighting information. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so now we have this cluster diffuse. We're going to go ahead and save this image. We'll just save it to documents, that's fine. And okay, so we have cluster diffuse, so it's just a black cluster, and we have our plane on there. So what we want to do is we're going to use this image, and we're going to bake it. So to do so, we're going to select our tree, and then you're going to shift select your plane. Then you're going to go over to render, and in render we got to switch to cycles. Baking only works in cycles. So then we're going to go down to bake. And under bake, we just want a diffuse map from this. We don't want this combined. So we're going to say we're diffuse. And we want to bake from the selected to the active. And we want 0 margin. If we do margins, it's going to make the edges of the leaves look weird. So we're just going to do 0 margin on there. And let's see where our camera is because we want a nice clean shot. So you hit 0 on your numpad to go to your active camera, and then if you want to move your camera, it's really easy to go into fly mode. If you hit shift and the tilde key, so it's also called the grave, it's right under escape next to 1. If you hit shift and tilde, then you have like fly mode where you have typical kind of shooter controls. And this is going to bake based on where the camera is, so we want to bake it straight through just like this. And then we are going to, now you got to go into your shading tab and make sure that you have a material applied and you have the picture selected. So we're going to make a new material for this. We're going to add a texture, and we're going to use the cluster diffuse that we had, and we'll plug that in. So now we have this all set up. So now if we go back into our bake, so we have our object selected, we have a material selected. Once again, in the shader, make sure you have this selected. So say you wanted to go bake normals or emission or whatever you were baking. If you had a different texture node selected, it's going to bake onto that one instead. So make sure that you have the right bake selected. So we're going to take this cluster diffuse, it's selected, and then we're going to go bake it. Oop. So you hold this, so we're going to select both of them, and you want whatever your object where you want to bake to be our active object. So then we're going to bake that out. And we look down at the bottom, you can see it's baking pretty fast. Okay, so now we have that image baked out. That's weird. Oh, we have to, where did it go? It didn't bake. I'm confused. It baked nothing. Oh, you know why? Because, okay, we made a mistake. All right, so under your baking, we want to turn off the direct and indirect light. We only want to get the color. That was my problem. Okay, so let's try this again. We'll go into this screen so we can kind of see what is happening here. Alright, so I've got it all figured out here. I didn't have my ray distance set properly. So once again, back to baking. So now we're going to select our branch cluster here, which once again, in cycles looks pretty solid, right? Good looking set of leaves there. So just to speed things up, we'll go back here. So we're going to select our branch cluster. We're going to select our plane. And then under ray distance, I'm working in Unreal scale. I'd shoot probably about 18 inches a meter. We're going to shoot through this by 0.2 meters. We don't have anything else visible in our scene. I have rendering turned off for everything except for these two pieces. So now we're going to go ahead and make sure in our shading window that we have our cluster selected, and then we're going to bake. So if you want to see how this goes, we'll go into like the texture paint so you can see. Oops. See what's going on here. So it's going to clear this image, and then it's going to bake through that plane onto the cluster, or that cluster is going to bake through the plane, and it's going to save all of the diffuse data, all the color data from it, and bake it onto that plane. As said, we're just going to do this with one. Just to show you how to do it, I strongly recommend baking a few different clusters so you have some good variation in your tree. When we put the whole final thing together, you'll see why I say that. The tree will look a little bit repetitive, but it's proof of concept. It shows you how it works. So our bake is just about done. All right, boom. So now we have this cluster baked out. We're going to want to make sure we save that image. Okay, so now on our plane, if we go look, let's go ahead and hide this guy. And then if we hit rendered, oh, so what's going on there? It's black. So that's not going to work for us. So we need to make an opacity map for this. So the way I do that is in Affinity. You can use, if you need a free program, you could use GIMP or Krita. I'm a big fan of Affinity. It's commercially licensed. It's almost as full function as Photoshop, but it's a one-time fee. I think currently it's on sale for 25 bucks. So we're going to go open up our cluster. So that's just under documents, and we called that cluster diffuse. So we're going to open up our diffuse cluster here. So you can see we have a transparent background, but to make our opacity map, it works on ones and zeros. So transparent isn't going to work. It needs to be black or white. If you go in between like gray, it'll be kind of translucent. So we're going to select all the white bits. And this can be a little bit of a tedious process. Or not all the white bits, all the transparent bits. And there are different ways to select things in whatever program you're using. I find that going in and doing this by hand is kind of the best way. It gets weird when you try to select based on transparency or lack of color data. So I'll go in and do it by hand. It's fine. Yeah, any of those bits that you don't select are going to show up as black in your final thing. So that's not always a crisis. Sometimes a little bit of black data can really break things up and make it look good. But for the most part, we're going to want to go and get all of these. All right, I think we're good there. So we got this over here. Sorry, missed one. And those got cut off on the edge there. That's not going to be great. Normally I would go fix that, but once again, proof of concept. We're just trying to show you how to get this done. So now I have all those bits selected, and I'm going to fill them all in black. Oh, we missed a couple, but that's okay. Now it's real obvious, right? So we got those all filled in. One more. Okay, and then we're gonna invert that selection and fill all that with white. Okay, so now we have an opacity map. We're gonna export that out, and we're gonna call it cluster opacity. Okay, so now we have our opacity map, so we're gonna go back into our shading texture here. Sorry, this is so small. Normally I do it on a whole window, but OBS won't let me bring in my second monitor for some reason. I can't even drag it over. But that's okay. Okay, so let's get this out of the way. And now we're going to add another image. Oh, and we are going to use this opacity that we made. So now we're going to plug that in to our alpha and make sure it's set on non-color. And right now you see nothing happened, but that's just because we're not in cycles. We're just showing the material. So if we go into cycles, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, it's because we're in our damn bark. I'm in the wrong material. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so now we have our cluster diffuse, and we're going to go change this to opacity. Pull in our opacity map, plug that into our alpha, and now we have this nice clear plane here. But the problem is, right, it's very flat. So we're going to do the same thing we did before with our leaves, and I'm going to go in and we're going to add a couple faces to this. Alright, so now I have some points where we can kind of move stuff around. So we're going to turn on proportional editing. And we're going to wrinkle up our thing a little bit. So like that one. We're going to make a few different ones. Just to give a little bit of variation to it. Right. Alright, so now we have three separate clusters there. Just like we did with the leaves, we're going to go add those to a collection. And we're going to call it clusters. Alright, so now we're going to go back to our tree, which is currently hidden. Let's bring our tree back in. Let's hide all of this stuff so it's out of the way. And now we have our tree ready. We already set up our vertex group for where it's going to paint the clusters when I was showing you before. So now we're going to use that and create a particle system. And we'll do hair. Let's do like 500 of them and see how it looks. And then we're going to render as a collection. We're going to select our cluster collection. And we have to tell it to only go on our vertex group where we painted the weight. Alright, so now you have your leaves on your branches. We're going to do just like we did. Oh, so we have a problem. Once again, it's with the origin, right? The origin of these. No, we're good. Okay. So we're going to randomize the scale. We're going to turn on advanced so we have the rotation. And we're going to randomize the rotation. And right now the phase is 0, so it can't randomize anything. So let's turn up the phase a little bit, and then let's randomize our phase. And let's pop into rendered view and see how it looks. Let's go hide all this other stuff. Whoops. And now we have a tree populated with clusters. I think they need to be a little bit bigger. Alright, and let's get a look at this in rendered mode. Let's make sure that we have everything turned on properly for rendering. So we don't want to render the leaves. We don't want to render the clusters. We only want to render the tree. Whoops. So now let's render out our tree and see how it looks. Oh, so our tree, so we never converted this particle system to a mesh. So let's go ahead and convert that, and then we'll go get rid of the particle system we had on the tree. We're going to select all of this. And we're going to call this tree. All right. And now let's take a look. Get it from a different angle so the light's better. I still don't like this material. Something went wacky with that, but let's go. Let's look at our bark. It's weird how we have that seam there. We're going to have to go fix that. Huh. Whatever. Oh, let's render it out. Let's see how it looks. So the bark isn't great, but honestly, we have a pretty good looking tree here. You can go in and play with the bark texture, play with the unwrapping, try and get it more how you like, but I think this looks pretty good. And let's just go ahead and look at it. So we are at 5,800 triangles, including all of that leaf density, and it looks really good, right? We'll do a final render of it. Let's do some composition here. advanced denoise action. All right. Let's go back into layout. And let's give this a bake. Or let's give it a render. Let's see how it looks. Alright, and there we have it. A tree all denoised and game ready. So if you want to see how to do it in speed tree, it'd be a much shorter video with much more power and much, I don't know, better trees, but trees that have a lot more options for getting a lot more detail with low poly counts. So if you decide to go that route, I'd be happy to help you there. But as it stands, there you go. There's the whole process in Blender of making a tree.